I made 7 different sourdough recipes and this one was the best. Some were overly complicated, some made dough that was impossible to work with, and some just didn't produce the kind of bread most of us actually want to eat. After testing them all, I've landed on the one recipe that checks every box. Reliable, simple, and beginner friendly, while still giving you that bakery quality sourdough results. This is the sourdough recipe I recommend to anyone who's tired of flat loaves or confusing directions. It's the one that actually makes sense, and I'm gonna show you exactly how to make it. Let's go. All right, we're gonna start mixing the dough for my beginner sourdough recipe, the one that thousands of people have used because it just works. Now, the ingredients that we need for this recipe, we're gonna be using 500 grams of bread flour, and I definitely recommend that you use a high protein bread flour, 350 grams of water, 100 grams of your active sourdough starter, and 10 grams of salt. Now, you don't have to remember this because I have the entire recipe linked down in the description for you, so you can make this as soon as you're ready. All right, so what we're gonna start doing is actually the Autolyse. And in the Autolyse, all we're doing is combining the flour and the water. We're gonna mix up our 350 grams of water with 500 grams of bread flour. We'll mix this and then we'll let this sit and rest. And what basically the Autolyse does is that it hydrates the flour and it starts the gluten development. So I've got my water, and now I'm gonna add my flour. And bread flour is really important here. It's gonna create a dough that has elasticity and extensibility. So you can think of your dough as kind of like a rubber band. You want it to stretch out and then snap back. And doing the Autolyse and using a high protein bread flour is gonna help that process along, and it's gonna make your dough a lot easier to handle later on. So in particular, if you're a beginner, you definitely want to use a high protein flour and don't skip the Autolyse. Okay, so all I've got here is my flour and my water. I'm gonna get in here and mix this up. And you have to remember that sourdough is just messy. I'm gonna get in here with my hands in just a little bit, and it's just part of the process. Now, if you haven't done an Autolyse before or you've never heard of it, it might seem a little bit strange that we're not adding in our sourdough starter or our salt yet, but this is one of those things where you just kind of have to trust the process. So I'm using my hands here to kind of squeeze together the flour and the water. And while we do this, I want to talk to you about some other sourdough recipes. Now, there's a lot of different ways to make sourdough bread, but what you want to look for when you're looking at a sourdough recipe, the first thing is the amount of water that's in the recipe as it relates to the flour. Now, that's called hydration. And a higher hydration recipe, meaning a recipe with a lot of water, is going to be very difficult to handle. You're going to end up with a really sticky dough that can be a real challenge to work with throughout the entire process. But the benefit of having a higher hydration recipe with more water is that you're gonna get a larger crumb in your bread. And what that means is all the little holes that are in the sourdough bread, you're gonna get a more open crumb with larger holes. So a lot of times when people think of sourdough, they're thinking, oh, I wanna have those big holes in my bread. And that is what you achieve when you have a lot of water in your recipe. Now, if you don't have a lot of water in your recipe and you're using a low hydration recipe, then you're gonna end up with bread that doesn't have all of those holes in it. It might be denser. Think of like grocery store sandwich bread, how when you look at it, there's no giant holes in it. So that's what will happen if you have a lower hydration recipe. Now this recipe is right in the middle, which I think is perfect because you're gonna get those sourdough holes, that open crumb, but they won't be so big that all of your butter is gonna like fall through the bread when you're putting it on, because nobody wants all their butter to fall through, right? I want to keep all my good stuff on my bread. So this recipe is designed so that it's right in the middle. It's still easy to handle, but you will get that nice open crumb. Okay, so now I've got my flour and my water mixed. And remember, I told you sourdough was messy. I wasn't lying, it is. I'm gonna cover this bowl and I'm gonna let it sit here for 30 minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll add our starter and our salt. So I'll see you back here in 30 minutes. All right, our dough's been sitting for 30 minutes. Remember, all this is the flour and water. And now we're ready to add our active sourdough starter and our salt. So your active sourdough starter is gonna be the most important part of your bread. If your starter is not doing well, it's probably not gonna do a great job of making your bread rise. So make sure that you've got a healthy and active sourdough starter. It should be light and airy. You should see all of the bubbles along the sides of the jar, and it should double within 4 to 6 hours after feeding it, okay? So I'm gonna add my starter right to the top of my dough here, and then I'm gonna add my salt. Now I'm using a French sea salt. It's a gray salt. This is my favorite salt to use for sourdough bread. It's kind of a chunkier salt. I don't know if you can see that. So it's a chunkier salt. It's a gray sea salt from France, and I just love the flavor that it adds to the bread, but you can use whatever kind of salt you have, okay? So we're gonna be using 10 grams of our salt. There we go. And then we're gonna use our hands to mix this together. Now this step is really, really important. You really want to develop that gluten in your bread really well in the beginning, and this is how we do this, with a really good, very strong initial mix. Now it is a little bit difficult to get this starter and this salt mixed into this dough, but just stay with me and I'll show you how I do it. I'm going to take my hands and do sort of a pinching motion, almost like the claw, okay? I'm going to pinch this dough together, and slowly the sourdough starter and the salt are going to start to combine with the flour and water that we have in here, and then I'm going to get to aggressively mixing it for about, I don't know, up to 8 minutes, as long as I can before my arm gets so tired that I give up. Now, if you have a stand mixer, you could also do this in your stand mixer. Just add this to your stand mixer, and I usually do this in a KitchenAid on speed like 2 for about 5 minutes, and that'll get the dough mixed really, really well. But you can also do it by hand like I'm doing right now. And while I'm doing this, I want to talk to you a little bit about flour type, because I noticed in a lot of other recipes that they include different types of flour, like whole wheat, spelt, rye, things like that. And while I love those flours, they do change the dough a little bit. Now, they add wonderful flavor to your bread, but they absorb water differently. So if you're new to sourdough, I definitely recommend that you start with a recipe that's using all bread flour until you completely get the hang of it, okay? And in this particular recipe, the amount of flour that we're using with the starter and the water is gonna give us a dough that's easy to work with, still has those great sourdough holes, and produces a delicious loaf of bread. I've got my sourdough starter and my flour in here pretty well combined, and now I'm gonna get a little aggressive with the mixing. I'm gonna take my hand into sort of like a cupping motion, and I'm gonna slap the dough against the side of the bowl using my hand, and you'll see how I do that now. And I'm gonna do this for a long time, so we'll show you part of it, and then I'll come back and show you what it looks like when it's fully mixed. But this is really, really important because it creates structure in your dough, so don't skip this step. All right, I've got my hand in a cupping motion. Here we go. And I'm just gonna keep doing this, and this is gonna create a really strong dough. So we'll come back in a little bit and I'll show you what it looks like, and you'll see if I've worked up a sweat after doing this for about 8 minutes. I'm gonna stop here because I think my arm is about to fall off. So this is what my dough looks like after aggressively mixing it for about, I don't know, I think I lasted about 6 or 7 minutes on the mixing. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna cover my bowl, and then I'm gonna come back to this in 30 minutes and we'll start stretch and fold. So the dough's mixed, I did a really good job of combining everything, and I will see you back here in 30 minutes to show you exactly how to do the stretch and folds. All right, now it's time to move on to stretch and folds. Stretch and folds build gluten strength and structure in your dough without kneading. So if you were making bread with traditional commercial yeast, you would knead the bread, but we don't do that with sourdough. Instead, we do what's called stretch and folds, and you're gonna do 4 rounds of stretch and folds with a 30-minute break in between each round, which is kind of fun because the dough gets to take a little break and then you get to take a little break too. So one little pro tip here, something that's gonna make this process a lot easier for you, is if you just get your hands wet. So I keep a spray bottle nearby. That will make the dough a little bit less likely to stick everywhere, okay? So you're gonna get your hand wet, reach into your bowl, bowl, reach down, grab the dough, pull it up. We're stretching it and folding it over. Now, don't stretch it up so high that the dough starts to tear. So once you feel it starting to resist, then you're gonna stop, okay? And I turned my bowl a quarter turn. I'm gonna do the same thing, stretch it up, fold it over, quarter turn again, stretch it up, fold it over, and the last one, stretch it up and fold it over. So I did 4 times around the bowl, once around the bowl for a total of 4 stretch and folds. That's considered 1 round of stretch and folds. Now, what you'll do is cover your dough, let it rest for 30 minutes, and then come back and do that process again. You should see a transformation in your dough from the way that it looks right now, which is kind of shaggy, to the way that it looks when you're on your 4th and final round of stretch and folds. It's gonna look totally different. The dough will be smooth, it'll be a lot more elastic, it will have come together a lot more, and you won't see how shaggy this is right now. It's not gonna look like that by the time we get to our 4th round of stretch and folds, okay? So all the way around the bowl, 1 complete time around the bowl is considered 1 round of stretch and folds, 30-minute rest. Now I'm gonna come back and show you what my dough looks like for the 4th and final round of stretch and folds, so you'll be able to see the transformation from 1st round to 4th round. If you love this kind of step-by-step breakdown, hit that subscribe button. I post videos that take the mystery out of sourdough so you can finally bake bread that looks and tastes amazing. We are back to show you what the dough looks like for the 4th and final round of stretch and folds. Now, just looking at this dough, you can see that it already looks so much better than it did after the 1st round of stretch and folds. So that's kind of the magic of stretch and folds. We're developing and strengthening the gluten throughout this process, but because stretch and folds are so gentle, we're not smashing out and deflating all of the gas that's building up throughout this process. So you can see what my dough looks like now. I'm gonna do the 4th and final round of stretch and folds. I'm gonna get my hand wet so the dough doesn't stick, and do the exact same thing that I did before. I'm gonna reach in, and you'll see this dough is gonna stretch a lot less, okay? Pull it up and fold it in. Turn the bowl a quarter turn, stretch and fold. And again, once the dough feels like it doesn't want to stretch anymore, I'm stopping. I do not want to tear my dough, okay? So there we go. That was our 4th and final round of stretch and folds for this dough. Now we're going to transfer our dough into another container to finish the bulk fermentation. So the bulk fermentation process actually starts with sourdough as soon as you add your sourdough starter to your dough. I'm not sure if you knew that or not, but once we add the starter to the dough, that's technically when bulk fermentation begins. So I've got my dough in this container here. Now I like this container because it's clear. I can see into the container and I can clearly see how much my dough has risen. I also like because there's lines, which makes it really easy to see how much the dough's risen. I can also see all the bubbles along the sides of the dough as this process continues. And I have the lid for it, which is also really nice. So I've got my dough in this container. How long is bulk fermentation gonna take? I really can't tell you, and I wish I could say it's gonna take exactly 4 hours, but it's really different. If you live somewhere that's really, really warm, this process could be faster, like 3 hours. If you live somewhere that's cold or your home is really cold, it could take 6 hours. So it kind of just depends on how warm your dough is, how warm your house is, if your starter's really active, the type of flour that you used. We talked earlier about using some whole grains. If you made your dough using whole grains, it's going to ferment much more quickly than using just a bread flour, okay? So I've got my dough in the container. I'm gonna keep an eye on this for bulk fermentation. It'll be done when the dough has doubled in size, when it's light and airy like a giant marshmallow, when I can see bubbles all along the surface of the dough and the sides, and when I shake the container, the entire mass of dough moves as one. Those are all good signs that bulk fermentation is done. Okay, so I'll see you back here when bulk fermentation is done. Okay, our dough's been bulk fermenting for about 5 hours, and I have decided that bulk fermentation is done. Now, remember, it took 5 hours for me. It could take longer or a little bit less time for you, depending on how warm your home is, how active your sourdough starter is. There's a lot of different things that go into how long bulk fermentation is gonna take, so you can't just go by the clock. You have to read your dough. My dough has doubled in size. It's really easy for me to see because of my clear container with straight sides, I can see that it's doubled in size. I really like for my dough to double in size. My bread always turns out the best when my dough doubles in size. You can see on the surface of the dough that the edges are pulling away from the sides of the bowl, almost like a muffin top. It's coming away from the sides. I can see bubbles along the surface and the sides of the dough. And if you look in the container, you can also see that I've got some bubbles down here in the container. This dough is alive. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is give this container a shake. My dough should jiggle kind of like a giant light and airy marshmallow, okay? So let me give it a shake and you can see what that looks like. So do you see how the whole mass of dough is moving when I do that? That's another good sign that bulk fermentation is done. So I'm gonna call it for this one. I'm gonna take this dough out of my container and I'm gonna show you how to pre-shape it, okay? So I'm gonna use my spray bottle again, get my hand a little bit wet, just so the dough doesn't stick quite as much. And we're gonna get this dough out. And it came out pretty well. You can see that there's not a ton of dough stuck inside this container. It really did come out nicely, which is also another good sign that we did a good job on our bulk fermentation. The next step is to pre-shape your dough, and you're gonna need a bench scraper or dough scraper. This is my favorite one. It makes this job really, really easy. And then you're gonna use your hand. So my dough has been turned out onto my work surface. I'm gonna get my hand wet. I'm gonna get my dough scraper wet, and I'm going to push the dough in with the flat edge of the dough scraper, and I'm gonna go around all four sides of the dough. Let me show you that. Pushing it down and under with the dough scraper, down and under. Okay, and now I'm gonna start shaping this into a round for the pre-shape. I'm gonna take my dough scraper again, and I'm gonna hold it here at my hip, and then I'm gonna go from hip to head. So I'm gonna push underneath the dough. I'm pushing the dough underneath itself as I turn in a counterclockwise motion. I'll use this hand as a guide to guide the dough. So let me show you how to do that. Down and around. Once you get the hang of it, this is actually really easy to do. And you will have your dough pre-shaped into a round and no problem, no trouble at all. Super easy. Okay, there we go. Now, it's easy to keep going because this is, I don't know, this is like strangely satisfying to do this, but you want to stop. We don't want to overdo it because you will tear the surface of the dough, and the dough kind of does this thing where it goes like, and it all sort of falls flat, and you definitely don't want that. You've worked way too hard to build up all the gas that's in this dough during bulk fermentation that we don't want it to deflate. So we're gonna stop right here. We're gonna leave this dough sitting on our work surface uncovered for about 15 minutes. Now this is the first time in the entire process that our dough's been uncovered. That's because we want it to form a light skin. That way when we go to do our final shaping, I will flip this dough over and it's not gonna stick to my surface, which will make final shaping a lot easier. Now, what you saw me do with the pre-shape there was pretty easy because of the hydration of this loaf, the amount of water that's in this dough. This dough is still flexible, elastic, easy to handle. But if there was a lot more water in this dough and it was a really high hydration dough, I wouldn't have been able to touch it with my hands, and I would have been using my dough scraper the entire time. It would have been fighting me and it would have been sticky. So just know that the recipe actually makes a really big difference in how easy it is to handle your dough. So I'm gonna leave this here for 15 minutes and then I'll come back and show you how to do the final shaping. Okay, our dough has been sitting here for about 15 minutes and it is not sticky at all. It has formed a light skin on the surface of the dough. We're gonna turn this over and I'm gonna show you how to do the final shaping. So I'm gonna use my dough scraper, pick it up, turn it over, and the benefit of letting it sit for 15 minutes is not only to let the gluten relax, but also because now it's not sticking, you can see it's really easy to move and really easy to work with. So I've got my dough with the skin side down on my work surface. I don't even need my water bottle anymore. Don't need to get my hands wet. I'm gonna stretch this dough out just a little bit. That is plenty. And we're gonna final shape it using my letter fold method. This is a really easy way to do your final shaping with your sourdough bread. I'm gonna take the bottom third of my dough and I'm gonna fold it up. Gently press it down. You want to be gentle this entire time because you don't want to actually smash all the gases that have built up in this dough, okay? We're not looking for flat bread. So I folded up the bottom third. Now I'm going to take the top third of my dough and I'm going to fold this down just like a letter. Give it a light press there. And then I'm gonna turn it and I'm gonna roll it up. Easiest part of the whole process, just roll it right on up. And when I do this, you can see I'm being firm about it, but I'm not smashing the dough down. Okay, there we go. And now you can see these edges here. Let me turn this so you can get a better look at that. I'm actually gonna pinch these edges to seal them, okay? Because if I don't, when I bake this, the ends will be kind of weird. So I'm just gonna take my hands and I'm gonna pinch, pretty easy. And then the other thing we wanna do with our final shaping is create a little bit of surface tension. And again, this is similar to when we were doing our pre-shaping. We want surface tension because we want our dough, when we put it in the oven, to spring up and have this great oven spring so we can have a tall, light loaf of bread. But what we don't want is to do such a tight shaping that we tear the surface of our dough. That'll completely defeat the purpose. So I've got my dough shaped. I'm gonna take my bench scraper, the flat edge of it, and just push the dough slightly towards me, also using my hand as a guide. And that's just gonna create a little bit more surface tension, okay? And then I'm gonna use my dough scraper again, or my bench scraper, pick it up, flip it over, and put it seam side up into my banneton. Now, if you don't have a banneton, you can use a bowl lined with like a tea towel that you have floured, but a proofing basket or a banneton works great for this. So this is what my dough looks like after the final shaping. I'm gonna cover it, and then I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator for the cold ferment. Now, I like to put my dough in the refrigerator for 8 to 18 hours. This allows me to bake this bread on the schedule that works for me, okay? I don't wanna bake bread right now because it's the middle of the day. I would rather bake this tomorrow and have it for dinner, okay? So I'm gonna put this in the refrigerator. Now, how long can you leave it in the refrigerator? That's up to you. I don't like to leave my dough in the refrigerator for more than 24 hours because I find that at the 24-hour point, the dough starts to deteriorate. You'll still have great bread, but it isn't going to give you that oven spring. It won't be as tall as you want, okay? So 8 to 18 hours is kind of the sweet spot. Now, the cold ferment is gonna add incredible flavor and let the dough continue to develop. The wild yeast and bacteria will keep working very slowly in the fridge because the cold will slow them down, but they're gonna create these organic acids that add depth and just the slight tanginess that we all associate with sourdough, and it really gives you the flexibility that you want with timing. So this guy is going in the refrigerator, and I will be back to bake it in about, I don't know, 12 to 18 hours. All right, our dough has been in the refrigerator overnight, so about 16 hours. I just took it out, it's nice and cold, and now we're gonna score it and bake it. So let me show you how to do that. I've got my dough here. I'm gonna take the cover off. Now, my Dutch oven has been in the oven preheating at 450 degrees, so it is very, very hot. You wanna preheat your oven with your Dutch oven inside, so you'll have a really hot Dutch oven when you put this dough in. So I'm gonna take the lid off. And again, be careful because it's gonna be really hot. And then we're gonna score our loaf. So you're gonna take your bread and you're gonna want to turn it out either onto a piece of parchment paper or onto what I have here. This is a bread mat. It's just a silicone bread mat. I'm gonna use this today, but you can also use parchment paper if that's what you have. So you're gonna put this right on top, turn your dough onto your bread mat. There you go. All right. And now we're gonna score it. Now this part is really important. You need to score your sourdough bread because that's gonna give an area for the steam to escape and cause the loaf to rise up when it's in the oven, which is what we definitely want. We do not want any flat sourdough bread. So in order to do that, you're gonna need a bread lom with a really sharp blade. So if you don't have a bread lom, you can use a really sharp knife, but a bread lom will work better. They're not that expensive. I highly recommend it. And then the key here is to make sure that you have a really sharp blade on your bread lom, okay? You don't want to saw your dough, kind of like you're sawing a piece of bread. You want to just do one quick cut from the top to the bottom of the surface of the loaf. That's called scoring your dough. So we're going to score it here. I'm going to hold my blade at a slight angle. I'm going to start at the top of the dough, and I'm going to score this bread all the way down, and I'm going to score about a ½ inch deep, so maybe a little bit deeper than you think, and it's going to be real quick. Let's do it. There you go. And because this dough is nice and cold, it was really easy to score it. Now all I'm gonna do is put my dough inside my Dutch oven, put the lid on, and bake it with the lid on for 20 minutes. So let me move my Dutch oven over so you guys can actually see this. Got my Dutch oven here, and then I'm going to show you one other trick that's really going to help get a nice tall rise and make sure that you get those really beautiful sourdough blisters that we all want on our bread. I'm going to take my spray bottle here with some water and just give it like 2 or 3 quick sprays. And what this is doing is just going to help generate additional steam while this bakes, so I can get those beautiful sourdough blisters that we all want on our bread. Okay, so I'm going to put my lid right on, and then I'm going to bake this at 450 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes with the lid on. Then we'll take the lid off and we'll keep baking for another 20 minutes. And I will see you back here when I've got this bread all ready to show you exactly how good it looks. All right, look at that. We have a beautiful loaf of sourdough bread. This just came out of the oven. I'm going to take it out of my Dutch oven and put it on my cooling rack. Now, you don't want to leave your bread in your Dutch oven because it will keep kind of steaming and the bottom will get really, really soggy. So we've got a beautiful ear, a beautiful belly on this loaf. I'm really happy with this. I think my family's gonna love it. And now the hard part, I have to let it sit on the cooling rack and cool before I can slice into it. Now I know that is tough because warm bread with butter is like one of my favorite things in the world. But if you slice into your bread too soon, what happens is that this bread is actually still baking inside. If you slice into it too soon, you might end up with a gummy crumb. The crumb is just a fancy word for interior. So it is best to let it cool if you can for at least an hour. So I'm gonna try to wait an hour, and then I will come back, slice into this so you can see how beautiful this sourdough looks. All right, I can't wait any longer. I'm gonna slice into this bread and show you what the inside looks like. Let's get in there. Oh, you can hear it's nice and crusty. We have a beautiful golden brown crust. And let's see what the inside looks like. There we go. We have a beautiful loaf of sourdough bread. You know, sourdough is made from just flour, water, salt, and starter, but the ratios and the recipe you use make all the difference. Small changes in hydration, the amount of water in your recipe, the type of flour that you use, and the process can completely change your loaf. So if you want the recipe for this sourdough bread, it's linked down below in the description. And I've got lots of other great sourdough videos that walk you through the entire process, so you'll be making bread like this in no time. You can check the next one out right here, and I'll see you over there.